It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gone.
Well, hello and welcome to the latest edition of Islands at War with me, Keith Engeli, and of course with
Nicola Hero. Morning, Keith.
Morning, Nick. So, July 1943, and this marks the third anniversary of the arrival of German forces, and our diarists have written quite interesting and long entries about this occurrence, and I thought we would go through them individually because rather than sort of lump them all together. First of all, Nick, can you tell us how the Reverend Ord addressed this anniversary?
Yeah, he notes in his diary on the 1st of July that it's the third anniversary of occupation, and he sincerely hoped it would be the last of the years when it was occupied. There wouldn't be another anniversary, which is a theme that unsurprisingly runs through all the diaries and a lot of the other things that we come across in various papers. And he also notes, now we've got to bear in mind, July, this is their second month of having reduced rations, and the bread ration's been massively cut, etc. Everything is really difficult to get hold of, and he talks about a gift from his friend, Mr. Chilcott Sr., who bought him a princely gift of some salt, table salt, because even something as simple as that was very, very difficult to get hold of. Mrs. Ord laments the fact that she put on a pair of woolen stockings because I think they were going out somewhere, and she thought she'd wear these, she would keep one of those sort of keep them for best because of the rationing. And the dog ran down the garden. She went after the dog because she was a bit worried because there were two Germans, and don't know what might have happened to said dog if they'd got their hands on it, and she caught her woolen stockings and ruined them on a bramble. So she was lamenting that, and it was obviously serious enough.
Well, yes, Ord describes it in the diary as a loss of the first magnitude.
Yes,
just the tear in the stockings.
The tear in the stockings. Yeah. So, but in part of the other thing that I find quite interesting of what Ord has to say about the third anniversary, and again, this seems to have become a theme in the last few months of 1943. Germans are becoming progressively unpleasant, taking over houses without consulting local authorities and just stripping them of anything that they wanted, or just stripping them of stuff to burn for firewood and things like that. And I think part of this is the change of the type of soldiers or not just soldiers in the army, but the type of troops and German other forces and supporting organisations like Organisation Todd and stuff like that, the type of people that they're shipping in.
Yeah, and it seemed to be the practice when Germans walked into or took over houses that they would be short of things to burn, so they just started taking the doors off and the door frames off and then ripping up floorboards and burning that. Yeah,
floorboards, yeah.
So they would actually get to the point where they would make it uninhabitable for themselves and then just simply walk away from them.
Yeah, and just leave them. I mean, they did that to the Duke of Richmond Hotel. Yeah. Very, very. In fact, that was earlier on in the occupation that they practically wrecked the place, and the Imperial Hotel out at Plymouth was another one that was like that. So yeah, I think it's just a change in attitude, because obviously Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of the UK, is long gone.
Yeah,
everybody now, even Hitler, acknowledges that that's a dead duck. It's not happening. So they've kind of lost the interest in being nice, in inverted commas, to the locals. So nicer than they've been to people in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of desperation creeping in amongst the Germans and their proxies over here, but of course we'll get to that in due course. Moving on now, another of our favoured diarists, Louis Guillemette, who was the liaison between our truncated government and German Field Kommandantur here. He, again, has made a significant diary entry. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, again, he's talking about, it's profoundly reshaped life, bringing privation, insecurity, and a continual fight for survival, which I think sums it up pretty darn well. He reflects how life has changed, the fact that islanders have endured such privation, insecurity, danger, witnessing poverty among foreign labourers. I think that's a euphemism for how they've seen the struggle that they have to just even keep alive when they've seen them being moved around the place, and that it's proved to be the necessity is the mother of invention, as that well-hackneyed phrase goes, because that's deepened the appreciation for life itself, and talks about, again, the grief and forced partings, the loss of homes, that sort of thing. But islanders also talk about how, and the Germans find this odd, they think we've gone a bit doolally, but the islanders are talking about, how much better things were, and it was, almost like heaven prior to the arrival of the Germans. And they don't really get it,
Well, no, because we know that right at the start, some German officers were talking quite privately about they arrive in the Channel Islands and find, the libraries are open, there's no books been burnt, you could talk freely, there was a free press, that they already had collided 3 years earlier with their first impressions of a free society.
Yeah.
The thing that comes about from the poignancy for me in the Louis Guillemette entry is this notion that the experience of the occupation would be at least a century long. Now, we're only less now than 20 years since the end of the occupation, and
20 years from 100 years at the end of
it. Yeah. Well, so we I don't know about us, we'll see the 100 years, but the structures that have left around the island will certainly be there.
Oh yeah,
definitely, and possibly due to podcasts like this, with the raising of the recognition that the Channel Islands had been occupied, we still meet many, many people that are shocked by this, that didn't really know. So the awareness of the occupation is certainly going to outweigh 100 years, certainly will.
Yeah, I mean, I did, just from the thing I did at the IWM at the start of the month, I've had a number of people email me to say that they're planning on coming over to Guernsey and to go. A couple of them have said they're going to Jersey as well, but they're certainly planning. They're aiming to come over next year because they've just seen it's opened their eyes to something that they knew very little about. They'd seen bits on TV or something on YouTube or whatever, or read a short article in the Daily Mail or something like that. So yes, we all know how accurate those are. with very rare exception. So they're keen to come and find out more. And also you've got the people that are like, hang on a minute, you've got all these bunkers that have never been attacked. They're very keen to come and see the part of the Atlantic Wall that's basically had one careful owner.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Okay, I want to cross now on this theme of looking back on 3 years of occupation on that anniversary, because our diarist, Mr. Lesota in Jersey, he notes quite an interesting sort of litany of things, cravings for sweets and greasy foods like fish and chips, and he walks us through a whole, as I say, litany, a list of things. Could you just talk us through some of those?
His other desire is for bicycle tyres that don't need constant patching, and perhaps for a new set of clothes after 3 years wear, which is a problem for everybody. That you've only got to look at the papers. It's people exchanging. You're not actually going to. It's very rare that you can get any new clothes, even down to things like underwear. You see adverts saying that a supply of 200 pairs of gentlemen's underwear is going to be made available in the next month. Well, there's 20,000 people in Guernsey. It's not going to go very far.
And soap is made with whiting and pumice powder.
Yeah, it's not very effective.
No.
It's more for looks rather than anything else. I think it's basically it's soap substitute with the vain hope that it might have some of the cleaning properties, but I don't think it really does from what most of the people have described. But he also talks about, and this is a sort of military aspect of it, was that the Germans had a big military parade.
Yes.
In Jersey with thousands of troops, hundreds of horses and guns, and the march past reportedly lasted 25 minutes. Sounds a bit Putin-esque. They even went as far as, so they had the Deutscher I can't pronounce it, Deutscher Inseltung, something like that, which was the sort of newspapery thing that they published in Jersey for the troops, and that they had a special edition to mark the date. On the 10th of July, there was an order from the military commandant, Major General Graf von Schmettau, who appeared in that publication, and the order described the islands as the outpost of the German Empire, and basically saying they were going to hang on to it like Stalingrad.
Yes, there's a rather poignant entry from our other diarist, Violet Carey. She writes, in the paper tonight there is a picture of one of the guns at the Cotilles, which the Cotilles is a sort of hotel retreat above St. Peter Port. And under the picture was written, broadcasting at 2:30 yesterday afternoon from Bremen. So there was the Germans themselves in Germany were marking the anniversary of the third anniversary of the arrival of German forces on British territory. So they were pushing it in Germany.
Yeah, they're pushing it, and they're saying, we took possession of the Channel Islands 3 years ago, and we've got strong fortresses in these outposts of Great Britain, and we're keeping them, basically.
And there was this curious inclusion here, if I'm understanding this correctly. The Germans were sort of hinting that there had been some sort of an invasion attempt, had been fought off by the power of the German guns.
Yeah, that's just rubbish.
Well, we know, they're sort of quite spouting it quite openly.
No, that's just part that. No, this is just backing up, because they talk about, in the broadcast, they talked about the number of strong fortresses on these outposts of Great Britain, and they were bristling with weapons, and this is just a bit
machismo, really.
Yeah, it's just a bit of like, we held them off. I mean, who's going to prove them wrong? Nobody's going to know.
No.
Nobody in Germany is going to know. They're talking rubbish.
Yeah, but it must be the German psyche now. Effectively, they're on a retreat everywhere, eh? Apart from the Channel Islands.
Yeah.
Everywhere they're on the back foot. Okay, so that sort of rounds up how our diarists mark the third anniversary and, of course, the entry into the fourth year of occupation. But we move on now to something we started to talk about, as many things do, rumble on, and get more and more murky and interesting. There's a sort of continuing forced opening of deposit boxes, Nick.
Yeah, that carries on. And anything to do with jewellery and stuff like that. In Jersey, in the archives in Jersey, I was looking at this, and I found some stuff that there was a company called Bellport Limited, basically, which the Germans had got wind of was something to do with jewellery and gold. When the company had been formed in 1938, it was to deal in precious stones or gold, other precious metals. And so they wrote to the bailiff and said, what's this company doing? Has it got any gold? Where is it? Basically, because they hadn't found it yet. But and the bailiff very politely wrote back and said, I'll have to find out. So got hold of this company, Bellport Limited, their company secretary, and said, what's the story? And they came back and basically said, well, we were going to use it as a Jersey company to operate from Paris, but we're not aware that any business has been carried out. But then, of course, there's a war intervening anyways. They're basically, you don't go looking for any gold and precious stones here because we haven't got any. Likewise, there was another company called General Securities Limited, which, again, was another one that was formed in Jersey, was going to operate from Paris. But they said, well, we've got accounts submitted annually and it's never actually done anything really. So no, go away.
And this continues, this rumbles on into August and so on, some of these things. So it gets really quite, as I say, a bit murky, and the Germans sort of starting to struggle with the notion of offshore bank accounts, although, of course, they were using Switzerland heavily by now.
The people that were asking the questions didn't know and didn't understand what was going on.
No, exactly.
Anyway, I mean, it should have been fairly obvious that you're not going to be carrying out major trading operations at that point in physical goods.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And the Channel Islands, it'd be a bit on the tricky side.
Yeah, I think it's the notion of a company existing in one place, and if it had any assets, the assets would be somewhere else.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that one will move on through the next couple of months. We're also now, the Germans are getting a bit upset about elements around the Red Cross and cryptic messages and so on. You've turned up quite a lot about this. And,
I have, yeah. Just before we move away from the matters financial, I turned up something that it's really weird. I thought it was weird when I was looking through the Jersey archives, and the bailiff of Jersey ends up getting a request from the Dr. Casper at the Feldkommandantur. He said, there's a lawsuit going on. It says, in a lawsuit in Germany over an insurance policy, the question has arisen as to whether the Commercial Union Assurance Company Limited, which I think that went on to be Norwich Union, didn't it?
Something like that,
and then now Aviva, it is whether they're liable to pay damage even if no policy was submitted, or whether it is liable to payment only on submission of the policy. For this purpose, a photographic copy of the insurance policy is enclosed. A short legal opinion with regard to this matter and the return of the insurance policy are requested. Quite how they think they're going to enforce an insurance policy against a UK company.
Well,
in the middle of a war, I'm not really...
middle of a war, they're not really looking like they're going to win now.
No, exactly.
This is German box ticking to an absolutely, what would you call it, surreal.
It's very strange, but yes. So this one runs on into August. It gets more weird. But anyway, I thought I'd trail that one.
Yeah.
We will talk about that one in August because it turns a bit Python-esque, really. And anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So Red Cross.
Back to the Red Cross. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
And well, there's quite a few elements along this. And there was a sort of the technique used by Channel Islanders to convey messages back from the UK to the Channel Islands and vice versa. And the Germans were starting to get a whiff of this because there's a little bit of English humour mixed up in all of this as well. Yeah,
so that they had cryptic messages that came through. There was one that came through via Canada, which just said, "J'ai entendu vous avez par ici, Guernsey." And so an SOS is how this is described, was put out in the paper. What they were doing was they just said, "We've had a message for j'ai entendu," which brought forward two people who came forward to the Red Cross. Now, in Guernsey French, the address runs as, "I understand your hardships over here," or something along those lines. And then there's another message that came through, "And still got Vachon Farm, St. Martin's, Guernsey." Still got cows on the farm.
Yeah.
And a few other things like this. People used various other ways of conveying messages. I think I've mentioned before, that they very quickly worked out that they could tell their relatives in the UK that the RAF had been in the area and conducting operations by saying, Rupert, Arthur and Fred have been to visit and stuff like this. And the Germans didn't clock that.
No.
Because all these messages were censored, and we'll be talking about the censor later. But the Germans got blooming annoyed about this, to say the least, and said, "Look, pack it in." And to a certain extent, the Red Cross office that's manned by Guernsey people here and Jersey people in Jersey were getting a bit peed off with it as well, because they were having to spend time tracking down people for things which were potentially a real message, but also potentially contained cryptic ones. And yeah, and there was a whole load of stuff going on about the Red Cross, and the Germans got very upset.
Okay, moving onwards now, we enter some of the more serious effects.
Well, should we just deal with the other bits of the Red Cross stuff that I found in Jersey?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Before we so the Germans, as I say, got upset about these things. Then there was a bit of correspondence going on between the bailiff of Jersey and the Germans, and similar stuff going on here as well. And they were basically, the Germans had decided, because there've been a lot of complaints about the Red Cross messages either not turning up. You go for a month without any Red Cross messages turning up, or you'd have severe delays. I mean, we're talking 3 months is about the average for a message to make its way here, because it's coming via Portugal. But some of the messages are going via Berlin to be censored. They're going all over the shop before they actually get here. So the Germans finally agree that actually they'll transfer censorship of the messages from Berlin to Paris, which hopefully will lead to a considerable saving of transit time. Or what they don't know is it's basically only going to do that for another year, and then that'll be out the window. Because they've got closer contact between the Feldkommandant in Guernsey and the censor in Paris, because they're basically all in the same military command at that point, then it should, I think this is probably a euphemism, but it says, enable any points of difficulty to be cleared up with the minimum delay. In other words, if we think people are messing about with the messages again, we might be able to sort it out quicker and keep the flow of the other messages going. The Commandant says that, basically they'll keep a close eye on the flow of the messages. There's another bit that I hadn't really appreciated. I kind of assumed that this was in place from the start, but it wasn't. And it's telegraphic messages to the International Red Cross. Now, with the Red Cross being the protecting power, well, Switzerland being the protecting power rather, and the International Red Cross being based there, I kind of assumed that if there was an emergency in, something that they absolutely had to get a critical message out there, that would happen. The Germans would allow it. But this letter is dated 19th of July 1943, and it's very much talking about the Germans would now allow this to happen in extremis. It's not to be seen as a regular method of communicating messages by that fashion. I just assumed that it would have been possible to do this. It does say there will be an extra charge for any sender. I don't know. So this is not just like government messages. This is supposedly some sort of service where if you had some absolutely critical information to get out. I don't know if it was ever used, to be honest, or certainly not by anybody trying to send a normal message.
It's hard to think about what would
qualify.
Yes, exactly.
I think the answer is probably nothing as far as the Germans were concerned.
That's why they're slightly.
And that's why, but I kind of assumed that if the government needed to do it, this would have already been in place. But it seems not. The letter goes on saying, "Okay, we note your complaints about non-family news and insufficiently addressed messages, and we'll keep an eye on it," sort of thing. We'll encourage people not to.
Yes, and in that letter, I notice here that under lack of messages, someone has written or typed out in the letter there should be approximately 9,000 to 10,000 messages for Jersey in the next few days.
Yeah, I love the fact that if you look at the watermark on the paper, this letter's been written by the German Feldkommandantur, and it's King's Mail Bond is the paper.
Right. Yeah.
You used to get Basildon Bond paper. I remember that from when I was a kid, where it's sort of embossed. Well, it's shown up on the scan of this picture. There's another thing that I just didn't know about. I don't know. I just assumed that this sort of stuff came from France, but the letter goes on to talk about artificial limbs.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I'd just kind of assumed that if you needed a replacement artificial leg or whatever, and bearing in mind there were quite a few people who had accumulated injuries during the First World War. Exactly. There's a number of them that we've talked about already, one-legged fisherman and one-legged Frenchman that gets locked up, and various others. I kind of assumed that if you needed a replacement artificial limb, it came from either Germany or France or one of the other mainland Europe countries. But this letter talks about the Germans are actually saying the ordering of artificial limbs, etc., should now be given to the German Red Cross in Paris for manufacture by a French company, as it's no longer possible to get them from England. I mean, they must have had to ship them on a Red Cross ship to Portugal and then onwards from there in the same fashion as they were doing with the Red Cross messages.
But I think in Germany there must have been quite a market now for artificial limbs.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the light of the hammering they took on the Russian front.
Indeed.
Okay, what should we deal with next then?
Should we do health?
We'll do the health then. Health, tuberculosis and medical infrastructure. Rising tuberculosis.
Yeah, this is partly to do with, and I think you pointed this out to me earlier on, it's something else that I've got notes on. We've got notes on here as well, it's to do with the rations. It's the falling food that the people are getting to eat.
Lack of vitamins, isn't it?
Just lack of vitamins. This bread ration's been cut to a ridiculously low amount. I mean, Louis Guillemette talks about a meeting with Colonel Nakfus, who'd come across from Jersey to see the bailiff in Guernsey, and Durat Lille. Louis had obviously been present at that meeting. Lille's arguing for restoring normal bread rations because of this. It's, the worsening public health. The German officials replied that the TB patients would get extra bread. Well, that's a bit late then, isn't it? You've got TB already. And they were kind of using this as a justification because the Germans wanted 5,000 tons of tomatoes to be shipped off to France. And they were trying, bizarrely, to claim that more stuff was coming in than was going out. Well, that's probably true. More stuff, but there's a reason why there's more stuff coming in than going out, because you're bringing in a lot of stuff for your troops, not for the civilian population. And then they make a kind of vague promise about seed potatoes for the next thing. But Lille says, look, we really need to just sort this TB problem out and the rations, etc. There's a slightly odd request that comes from BBRAC as well. asking if they can have 2 or 3 tons of tomatoes shipped there. I don't know how, given the state of the German infrastructure at the time, I don't know how they would have actually got there. And even the Feldkommandantur in Guernsey, for once, are slightly realistic about this and say the anticipated transport shortages would prevent it. I mean, they'd be spoilt by the time they got there. And then they banged on about seed potatoes again. But going back to the health thing again, really, and the rations, they're all kind of tied in, but the Feldkommandantur then basically respond to this by visiting various different states' properties and where patients are being looked after, so the country hospital, the town hospital, etc. And they also then go and visit some of the places where they're staffing some of their own, they're putting up some of their own organisation, Todd staff, where they're putting up some of the OT workers as well, and they're actually ordering the installation of wash basins and staff examinations by German doctors for various infectious diseases and TB, because that's part of the problem, is stuff's being imported when they're shipping people in. They go up to the King Edward VII in Guernsey, and the Germans have already taken over 2/3 of the King Edward VII, so leaving insufficient room for TB cases there. So they're saying, well,
this is the sanatorium.
Yeah, saying basically you've got to stay at home, which is not ideal. And then they come up with this very odd proposal. But for anybody listening who doesn't know where Herm is, Herm's another island. It's about 3 miles from Guernsey. It's very nice. No cars.
A 25-minute on the ferry.
Yeah, very nice for a walk. Got a couple of pubs, a hotel. One of the hotels is called the White House Hotel. And the Germans say, and it's worth mentioning at this point, the Germans aren't really using the island more than for a bit of shooting and recreation from their part. They do put some guns on it for a little while. They're eventually removed. So there's basically a caretaker and his wife, and that's it there. But they drag Dr. Simmons, Dr. Sutcliffe, one of the inspectors from the Feldkommandantur, Inspector Zachow, his clerk, and Louis all get on Louis's boat, the Ida, and have to traipse across to go and have a look at the feasibility of using the White House Hotel in Herm as some sort of place to go and put all these TB patients. Even then, I don't think it's not a very big building. I don't think they'd have put a dent in the amount of people that they were trying to. It might have helped, but I can't imagine it would have done an awful lot more. But while they were there, they note that 4 German vessels landed, considerable troops and equipment, and they were to remain, ending any hopes of Herm as a refuge from war. Because Louis had been able to go over there a few times.
Yes, I mean, Louis did have his own boat, as you say, and he used to take German officers over so they could go shooting rabbits.
Yeah, because it meant he could go for a walk around Herm.
And do a little bit, collecting wood and pine cones and doing a bit of fishing
and stuff as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
So these troops, did they stay there then?
Yeah, they did stay for a bit, but they didn't stay for very long.
Not for the whole time, because there was a subsequent raid, I think, on Herm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That happened earlier.
And that one was slightly earlier. There were a couple of raids, actually, but not that they encountered any Germans. Yeah, so they concluded that it was possible to clean the house for mild cases and suspect cases of TB to rest. It was just not practical to have a full hospital with nursing and on-premises medical organisation. Just far too difficult. I mean, you've got to ship people backwards and forwards. It's just going to be a pain in the neck, particularly given that the RAF were, shooting stuff.
Yeah.
So the Inspector Zachow, said, well, I'll ask the General's permission and see if we can get permission to proceed on that basis, and we'll see where we go from there. Now, interestingly, we talked about the Germans that landed there, that Louis sees landing there, etc. They're getting a bit bother next month, but you'll have to listen to the August 1943 episode to find out what sort of bother, but it's big bother.
Okay. Was there some rumours of further deportations?
Yeah. The Germans loved collecting statistics. Absolutely loved it. They've got statistics. If you go into them, look in the archives, there's statistics for absolutely everything. But some things, when they asked for them, used to make everyone a bit nervous. And in July 43, the Feldkommandantur requested figures on British men born in 1922 and those in vital occupations who had been exempted from the previous deportations. So this fueled worries that, hang on, there's going to be another round of deportations, which was denied by the Feldkommandantur. Inspector Zachow, I think that's how you pronounce his name, said, "Oh, they're not for an evacuation. I don't know what they're for, but I'm just here to supervise this.
I'm just following orders."
Yeah, basically, I'm here just to supervise the civilian police. I don't ask me, but interestingly, still denies that this is going to be used for any sort of nefarious purpose, except.
It's quite a deep dive into statistics, so it's very specific. I mean, they're working overtime to compile figures, and the Germans say this has to include all children living with parents in relative categories and born after the end of 1924. So it's a very, very niche request. It's either seen as niche or random. It just seems.
Well, there was a movement in France for removal of the 1922 age group. So the Germans were looking to do that anyway. And he didn't. He says, I don't know if that will apply in Guernsey, but then continues to double down on we're not going to deport anybody.
Is this in France, in the context of France then next to 19, so this is 19-year-olds or so? This is the precursor to moving French civilians into working in Germany in factories?
Yeah, because they weren't getting.
So it's a labour sweep, really, isn't it?
It's a labour sweep, and that's what it sort of turns into in the Channel Islands as well, but for the Channel Islands, right? Because we've already talked about they're trying to have a labour sweep, and this is part of that. But to actually work in the Channel Islands rather than anything else. But where they've had that, we've talked about this before, they had this sort of job agency type place that was sort of run by the French and sort of run by the Germans. It was kind of like some sort of strange joint venture recruitment agency, where the Germans had promised the French that for every 100 people that volunteered, they'd release, I think it was 10 off the top of my head. I can't remember. We've talked about it in previous episodes. They'd release 10 French POWs or whatever, and it turned out, strangely, they didn't honour that.
No.
Totally shocked. And so that didn't really work. So they were kind of needed more labour than they were getting out of that, than volunteers to go and work in Germany.
But this again is another example of something that originates in France for the French population. Because Guernsey and Jersey are administered from Paris, Jersey and Guernsey are swept up in the statistic gathering, and then once the statistic gathering has passed, they don't then implement the conditions on the island. People in that age group weren't sent to work in German factories, but people in France were. So the order applies in both places, but in fact, the actuality only takes place on the French mainland.
And there's loads of orders which they don't even bother translate. They appear in German and French, and they don't even bother translating them. They get here, and it's like, the order's been put out, or whatever, but it's not.
So it's a precursor to computer says put orders out.
Yeah, well, it is really. It's like, you will put this order out. Okay, I mean, there could be, because there was the daft one about we're banning all training of wireless operators. We're not doing any of that. We were never doing any of that. This is a bit odd, but they just went, but best put that one out. Oh yeah, no wireless transmitters in your car. Well, we ain't got a car, and we most certainly do not have a wireless transmitter to put in said vehicle. Yeah, and in those days, you'd have been driving around with a truck, basically, to have a wireless transmitter in it. Anyway, but it's very odd. But they just blindly, I mean, you're not going to question it. You're not going to turn around and go, which idiot thought that this was a good idea? It's just not. It'll only end up with you going to the Eastern Front. So, but you're not going to do that. Right.
What's going on in other theatres of the war? Louis makes some diary entries about what the Allies have landed in Sicily.
Yes. So they've landed in Sicily. There's intense fighting in Russia. The German propaganda on the front pages of the Guernsey Press and the Jersey Post, the Evening Post, obviously not admitting to any of this stuff. But everybody knows about it because they're either listening to the BBC themselves on crystal radios, or other people are telling them what's been on there. So Louis talks about the Allies have landed in Sicily and holding firm. Now, he has a bit of an encounter with Major Kreft.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this in the July 43 episode. There's an annoying amount of Germans that work for the Feldkommandant, all with very similar names. And there's at least one Kreft, but there's two Crafts, which is spelled exactly the same, but with one letter changed. So it makes you have to be careful about which one you're talking about. But Major Kreft was a German official in the Feldkommandantur, and he'd just come back from leave, having discovered that his home in Cologne was destroyed in an RAF raid. And Louis says he's got a little bit of sympathy for him. He's a relatively junior officer, fluent in English, and Louis kind of gets on right with him. But Louis not quite so keen, though, about Inspector Osser. Now, Osser was an agricultural specialist who spoke a little bit of English, but non masses. And he wasn't very good at being an agricultural specialist when it came to the Channel Islands either, because he was, again, I think we've possibly mentioned this before, but not mentioned him in particular. But they weren't very good at realising stuff that grows in Germany and Austria won't necessarily grow in the Channel Islands because the soil types and stuff. I mean, you'd like to think if you're professionally qualified in this sort of thing, that you would very quickly realise that sandy soil and
the sea breezes.
Is going to be a lot different to trying to grow stuff in the middle of Germany or Austria. Anyway, that aside, also makes a joke, seemingly a very offhand joke, to Louis Guillemette when he's meeting with him about the fact that Louis is a spy for the British, and that caused a bit of unease for Louis. It seems that Osser actually was just ribbing him a little bit. The harbour master. He also tells him that the harbour master calls him the little fox, and this sort of thing. And Osser's then joking about all the spies are going to be rounded up soon. We've heard that the spy ring here have made a fatal mistake, and the secret field police are going to arrest them all. So look out, sort of thing. Now, Louis found this quite uncomfortable, and frankly, if you know where he lived and what was across the road, you'd be feeling pretty flipping uncomfortable as well, and you can still see some evidence of this when you're down there. But down at Bordeaux, where he lived,
the beach is just across the road from the house.
The beach is across the road from the house, but also across the road from the house, there's quite a big junction there where two roads meet. There's a crossroads there, and there was a German machine gun position literally across the road from his house. Now, it was there for very good reason, because they could basically control access to two of the main roads around that area, and also they could have turned anybody coming up the beach, if they got as far as the seawall and were trying to come over the seawall all along the road there, they could have turned the guns on them. But it also meant they were pointing basically directly at his house.
Yes.
So if somebody's accusing you of being a spy and saying they're going to be rounding them up and stuff like this, whilst even if they're sort of, they're teasing you a little bit and having a bit of a joke, it doesn't sit quite as well in that they're just teasing me when you've got some blokes with a machine gun just across the road.
And of course, the irony of this is that after the war, there were a number of local people were very unkind about Louis, floated some completely unfounded rumours about his closeness to the Germans, but that was the whole point of his job, was to liaise between the Germans and the local government.
Yeah, and try and mitigate and he was dealing with the Feldkommandant. It's the civil administration here dealing with the bit of the German forces that's to deal with civil administration. And von Alfeis has got some words to say about him, and later on we'll come to those, and they're certainly not very complimentary about him cozy. This is a senior German who most definitely does not think that they're cozy, that Louis is cozying up to the Germans. But Mussolini's resigned as well, which they see as pivotal, and they have a bit of a chat about that as well.
Yeah, Louis' diaries, which are published by Blue Walnut, carry quite a few detailed appendices with dealing with the civil administration. It sounds a very, very dry subject, but it's a book well worth having, because it is divided up into the more human elements of the occupation. But if you want a deep dive into how the government was forced to work with the Germans, it's also very good for that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it gives you a good steer. You know, obviously they can't put absolutely everything in there to do with the civil administration, but if it gives you a very useful steer if you wanted to go off and look at a particular area, they'll have some information about where they got that archival information from, and you can go to the Guernsey archives, go to the Jersey archives, and go and find. It makes finding something relating to a particular topic a lot easier, and it is just genuinely a very good read.
Okay, now again, sort of on the surface, a bit of a dry subject, but people are starting to talk about proposals for family allowance in Guernsey, but not only in Guernsey are they talking about it as well. We've had this, you picked up on this sort of strange coincidence that it's also being talked about the Channel Islands, whilst people from the Channel Islands were evacuated to the UK.
Yeah, so there'd been a proposal for children's allowances, basically, but, to top up incomes for poorer parents. And there was a bit of discontent about whether amongst the politicians and various other sectors of the community about, well, if you start this now during the war, you're never going to be able to take it away. And it had been mooted in 1941, and the Germans had basically said, no, you're not doing this. So it was a bit of a non-runner. But then all of a sudden the Germans in 43 start to think this is a good idea, and actually they suggest that this should happen. Albeit they then start meddling with what it's going to look like. So that Ambrose Robin, who's one of the other diarists that we talk about, who's involved with the Social Security Authority here, he spends an inordinate amount of time in July and August going through and working on what this might look like. He's constantly going to meetings. There's opposition from the controlling committee. They basically do not want it to happen. Mr. Whedon from the Social Security, he's working on it with Louis as well. And they eventually, there's various amendments are put forward, and there's a lot of toing and froing. And eventually the controlling committee say, well, okay, we'll accept what's in there. The Germans chip in there to Bob Worth about what they think. And this goes on into August and September. We'll come to more of that. But yeah, I found I was looking at that, and I was in two minds about whether I was actually even going to bother talking about it. And then I saw how much of it went on into the other months and how it interacted with other stuff. And then I came across in the July edition of the monthly review. Sorry, this appears in the 1st of August edition, but obviously this all happened in July 1943. So there's all this concern about how are we going to pay for this post-war? We've got no money. We've got no money now, so how are we going to pay for it during the course of the occupation? Why are we enacting this? It's going to make things worse. We're, already massively in debt, and by the time we get to the end of the war, the Channel Islands are 7 million in debt. So, it's a huge chunk of money. And I was looking at the Channel Island Monthly Review, and blow me down, they're having a conference in the UK about how the islands are likely to survive post-war because of funding for government services, etc. Who's going to be responsible for physical war relief and all sorts. And there were some fairly notable names in there in terms of who attended this meeting. So we had Colonel F.G. French, which is French as in the chap that had been in charge of Alderney prior to them evacuating. You've got Sir Donald Banks, who you know a fair amount about. Commodore H. M. Brock, Major J.S. Krill. So you've got a whole load of people.
The good of the Channel Islands that are in.
Yeah, Dr. John Lepatral, Dr. A. Morant, Justice Duparc, Mr. C.T. Lecain, and Mr. R.H. King Merritt. They all visit the conference and take part in it. And so it's also got large numbers of very senior people from the British government. And they're already talking. I mean, bearing in mind, this is almost 2 years before we get liberated. 22 months prior to us being liberated, and they're talking about how they're going to fix everything, all these various government matters about the islands.
Yeah, but what strikes me about this is two things, this thing in the Channel Island Review. So this is a magazine and paper that was started up in the UK to keep Channel Islanders in evacuation in touch with one another. But we've got a group of the great and good of the Channel Islands meeting to discuss areas of what would become political policy, and they're not politicians.
No, absolutely.
It's almost as this body of people in the UK, for all the right reasons, effectively trying to determine subsequent government policy in the years ahead. They're not in contact with either of the governments of Guernsey or Jersey. The other thing,
this is the nearest they can get to it, though, because they've got people who are very senior within society within the islands that have evacuated for various reasons.
To a degree, they're trying to determine, for all the right reasons I stress, future government policy post-war.
Oh yeah, and they very much, when you get towards the end of the article, they're very much cognizant during this conference that the islands are self-governing and autonomous. No, and that partly could be seen as the British government going, this, we're not paying for any of the work, but it's down to all the things about what they're going to do to restore the islands back to how they were.
But it also,
and they're saying, well, it's a bit early yet, but it's useful to do this preparatory work.
But it also feeds into this thing that I found amongst my family's papers, where members of the families who had managed to evacuate in the latter part of 1943 being contacted officially saying, will you be going back to Guernsey at the end of the war? And you can see that there is a linkage here, because what it's thinking is, well, can we get a handle on the amount of people that will go back? Those people will have to do something. They will then pay income tax. And you can see there's a coherency here in all of those things. I mean, I was quite shocked to see my family's being contacted, along with everybody else that had been evacuated. Are you going to go back to Guernsey? And yet we were still almost a year away from D-Day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, absolutely. My dad's mum, I've got her form that she filled in, and I think it might have been, it was either July or August 43, I think.
Yeah, it was around about this time.
This time, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was in the latter part of 1943, and it's asking very specific questions.
Very specific.
Did you have a job? What did you do? Who did you work for? That kind of stuff. How many of you will be coming back? Because, of course, that's the problem that perhaps some of the children had grown up and didn't want to come back. Whilst they might have been teenagers when they went, they might not have actually wanted to return.
But they must have, the Channel Island authorities, let's say in exile, must have reached out to the UK authorities to use infrastructure to get people's addresses. And so it's a very interesting part of social policy about the Channel Islands in the UK at the time. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, we'll see how that progresses.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, what have you got next for us?
There's arrests and various things. I mean, it wouldn't be an episode of the show without arrests, would it? I mean, there's daily accounts of the occupiers being in a bit of a strange mood. There's a bit of a rounding up of people for wearing victory brooches. The Germans appear very jittery. Reports are suggesting that some of the German firms are leaving the island. We'll have more on that in the August episode. Rumours of troop reductions. Now, this ties in. People are joining, taking 2 + 2 and coming up with 5 because they're going, well, hang on, all these Germans are pulling out, and they've seen German troops leaving, but seem to not be taking into account that there are other German troops coming in, albeit not as good as the ones that were here. That maybe the details that we talked about, they were looking for people born after 1922. That was in some way, shape or form connected because they were going to deport those men in case there was going to be some sort of uprising. Quite how we were going to do that, who knows? But yeah, so the wearing of victory brooches made from coins, so that there's a whole load of people that were arrested. I mean, it was done on a massive scale. And one guy did 2,000. No wonder there was no coins in circulation, and they were having problems having to print paper notes because people were making all these victory brooches. You didn't wear them overtly. You wore them under your lapel, and you would flip your lapel as a sort of sign if you saw somebody that you trusted and wanted to, give them a bit of a G up. There's various reports as well that a German pressman gets a tape machine working, which inadvertently prints out a story about life in Guernsey, which is a little bit odd.
Is this a German pressman in Germany? Or?
Yeah, Germany, and inadvertently printing a story about life in Guernsey in the German press, and it might have been a little bit too honest about what was going on.
Where was he getting the information from?
Yeah, obviously
soldiers?
it was obviously some sort of machine for reporting back, and not for public consumption. And somehow he's got his hands on it
and circulated it to the wider world. And also here, the German pressman receives a news report about life in Guernsey. Is this the same thing from an officer captured in Tunis?
Yeah, I think this is probably connected as well.
Yeah.
So this is all part of the same story, and they get away with publishing an article in Germany, which is perhaps telling a bit too much of the truth.
Yeah, revealing too much.
Lesotho in Jersey talks about acts of resistance there. This is absolute genius. I love this one. I mean, they probably didn't think they were so clever afterwards, but hey, 5 men were caught for stockpiling German rifles, ammunition, and gelignite in a shed on Pier Road. But the bit that I think is genius is they disguised their hiding place, their shed. They wanted to deter any Germans from going in there. So what did they do?
Sign up in German.
They did. They put a sign up in German saying it's forbidden to enter by order of the Feldkommandant. Sadly for them, didn't work. Then it was almost like Fagin was at large here as well in Jersey, because there's a tale of a German soldier taking a break from his duties and laying down on some bales of hay, and he took off his boots and was obviously enjoying the July sunshine and having a bit of a snooze on these bales of hay. Meanwhile, some children came along and nicked his boots. And there's also
this next one is really quite the one about the civilians wearing jackboots. Tell us that one. That was really
So Lesotho notes in his diary that there seemed to be an awful lot of people circulating around wearing German jackboots. These are this Jersey folk. And he said, well, they are, I'm assuming, because we talked about the SS Diamante, the ship that was wrecked on some rocks near Jersey. And he's saying, well, I'm guessing that's where they've all come from. They've just, I suppose if you've got a lot of people are down to having to wear sort of wooden cloggy type things, or just making wooden repairs to existing shoes and stuff. So if you get some free boots, why not?
But the idea of civilians walking around in German jackboots is
a bit odd, isn't it? No, I've not seen any photos of it, to be fair.
No, going back to these lads that were stockpiling German rifles and ammunition, how did they pill for that?
Who knows? I mean, unless they were driving for the Germans or something like that, who knows? I mean, but the Germans they're in a fairly bad place by this point, even over here. I mean, we've talked quite a bit in the last few episodes about the RAF activities and harassing and sinking shipping. And I've jumped ahead slightly here, but I think it's pretty worth mentioning, is that the Lesotho notes that the Germans were minesweeping at night. So they've got their minesweepers out and they're operating them at night. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're worried about the RAF attacking them if they're trying to do this during the day. But they're having to do it off St. Juan's Bay with searchlights. I mean, that's just going to draw attention to them, isn't it? I would have thought. But there's still loads going on. I mean, so aside from all these acts of sabotage, you've got the Germans pumping out regulations like nobody's business. There's German orders going out. In particular, the Lesotho knows that and notices that in Jersey they've banned public assemblies. And this happens at various points throughout the occupation. But they're prohibiting all public gatherings. And the official reason that the Germans gave was the widespread diphtheria. However, the locals believed it was just intended to suppress remaining social activities, given that they left the schools open. If they were worried about diphtheria, they'd have closed the schools. And this all fits around the kind of jittery theme that the Germans have got. They're a bit worried that there might be some sort of invasion. We talked about that in the June 43 episode. You know, they were worried about the fact that the air raid wardens and the police would actually be directing the Allied forces rather than, you know, helping the Germans, which, of course, they're not going to help the Germans. But there's been a real uptick in actual enforcement of some of the regulations as well. You know, in Jersey, around 30 people fishing for mackerel at Archie Rondell were caught breaking the 11 p.m. curfew and fined 1 mark per minute after the curfew. It's all very precise.
Well, the one that gets me here is a man received 6 months for verbally admonishing a woman, so a local woman, a Jersey woman, whose husband was serving in the British Army, for associating with German soldiers. So he'd taken upon himself to castigate this woman for not only consorting with German soldier, but being unfaithful to her husband as well.
It was a vicar as part of his sermon, though. So.
Oh, right, okay. So
he got 6 months. I mean, there just seems to have been a massive crackdown on things. There were cafe raids in the middle to latter part of July 1943. So the German field police are raiding cafes, confiscating IDs of civilians fraternising with German soldiers.
I'm just getting my head around that. Why would they confiscate an ID card of a civilian fraternising with a German soldier?
You then had to go to the Feldkommandant
to reapply for it,
to go and get your card back. So it basically meant they didn't have to arrest them and find somewhere to put them right there that second.
Just put them out.
But if you took their ID card away, they're completely stuffed. They can't really do anything. And then they've got to it's a bit like being on bail. You've got to then turn up to go and face the music. Otherwise, you lose out. So, but whilst the Germans are just citing this as being a bit of a crackdown on people basically
getting a bit uppity
and whatever, it's thought to be more likely that it is to curb social diseases, shall we say. Lesotho notes about 150 women were taken to German hospital for compulsory exams. There's more on wirelesses as well. You know, people are in trouble again for possessing radios and spreading the news, because the Germans really don't want the actual true news about what's going on to be spread around the islands, because they're again worried it'll embolden people to perhaps take action. But Lesotho notes that, there's real inconsistency between what people are getting in terms of a sentence for doing exactly the same thing. It's anything from 14 days to 21 months. Although he does note that, as we've talked about frequently, that whilst they might have been convicted, they're still waiting for their turn to go to jail because there isn't enough room. The Germans are still very jittery, as I say. It talks about a lot of anti-aircraft fire and coastal defence guns, thought to be firing at a British destroyer about 8 miles offshore, which triggered a general alarm and tank mobilisation in Jersey.
Okay, I think we've got a number of things here, Nick, that we can move over or continue to talk about in August of 1943. We're on track to put out our Christmas 1943 episode, possibly when? Christmas Day?
I think we might put it out Christmas Day.
2025?
Yeah, I think so. We'll do that.
So we got, obviously, that's our aim, and I think we will make it. Thank you to anybody that has managed to contact us. It's quite easy to contact us. It's occupied@gnetradio.com. And we've had a wonderful letter, or email, very detailed email from Ian in Yorkshire. Ian, thank you ever so much. We both replied to you. Anybody that has any memories or any connection to the Channel Islands, do contact us like Ian has, and sent us a fantastic picture of a motorbike, which we're going to... Nick and I are doing a live gig, aren't we, Nick, on the 20th, Saturday the 20th of December at La Villette Hotel, lecture for the Channel Island Occupation Society, of which we are both members. I'm a committee member. Nick and I will be talking about elements of research that have thrown up some quite sparky, some quite unusual items that in some cases unresolved. Maybe people attending could help us try and solve some of these mysteries. It's £4 entry, but that gives you a Christmas tea and gives you the ideal opportunity to join the Channel Island Occupation Society, which a year's subscription is just £17, I think. So join us at the Villiers Hotel at 2 o'clock-ish, Nick, on the 20th. Sit-down lecture, Christmas tea to follow.
I've got some photographs as well that nobody's seen before.
Yeah,
rather nobody in the Channel Islands has seen before, but that I've had sent to me that have come from the family of a German who was based here, and they've basically been in a loft somewhere.
Great. Well, I haven't seen those. So
you haven't seen them. No. So we might be there. Some of them are very obviously, I know exactly where they are in Guernsey. Some of them are a bit tougher, so we might have a little bit of a can you
Yeah.
Where do you reckon this is? They have all got. He did write on the back of them that they were all in Guernsey. So
Okay.
I've also got some from Jersey. So a bit like buses. Rather randomly, I've had two families of members of the German Armed Forces who were based in the Channel Islands get in touch with me. So within weeks of each other, it's just nothing like that for ages, and then two within weeks that say, "Oh, we've got these photos that we've come across that have been in a box in an attic for God knows how many years. And would you like me to send you copies of them?" So we'll be having a look at those, which hopefully will be of interest to people as well. And we'll be talking about Christmas. It is Christmas, and yeah. I think we did promise we'd mention Christmas as well. So we'll be talking about the different experiences that people had. So people here in the Channel Islands, people who had been deported by the Germans, and people who'd evacuated to the UK, and there's some very broad-ranging differences between their experiences.
Okay, well, that will be in our live gig on the 20th of December at 2 p.m. at the Villiers Hotel in Guernsey. Right, I think time to go.
Yeah, I suppose we'd better say goodbye. Thanks very much to everybody that's been in touch. Thanks for all the feedback, and do keep up with writing into us. We're always pleased to hear from people. We'll be back with August 1943, and there's a whole load for August. I've done the script already, sent it to Keith, and we've been looking at it. So there's plenty coming up there. So do tune in then. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and